Borderlands 2 is the peak of the franchise. And if you agree, then you probably feel the same thing I do right now. Cautious optimism about Borderlands 4. So, what does it need to do? Can it actually recapture that magic? And more importantly, what even is the Borderlands magic? To answer that, we need to take a quick look back at every Borderlands game and see what actually made them work. Or didn't. The first Borderlands had probably one of the most pivotal last-moment decisions in game development history. At least that we know of. Originally, the game started with a bland generic visual style. The typical gritty brown-grey shooter that was infecting seemingly every game from that era. But Gearbox was worried, rightfully so, that people would not even give the game a chance since it was a new IP and it looked like every other shooter on the market at the time. So with just a few months before release, they slapped on a cel-shaded art style, gave everything a comic book edge, and suddenly Borderlands wasn't just another first-person shooter. It looked like nothing else out there. And that bold choice arguably saved the game and the franchise that will eventually came to be. But visuals alone didn't carry it. Borderlands nailed a very specific feeling. Chaotic junkyard mayhem with just enough RPG DNA to keep you grinding. The moment-to-moment gunplay wasn't perfect, enemies were often bullet sponges and the movement felt kind of floaty at times, but it didn't matter. You were always chasing that next weapon drop, and for me, regardless of how many hours I've poured into this game, I've never once felt bored. The game leaned into co-op in a way few shooters did at the time. 4-player online felt fresh, seamless, and most importantly fun. The story of Borderlands isn't anything to write home about, pardon the pun, but it's there for you to enjoy. The tone of the first Borderlands is definitely the least out there in terms of humor as the whole series is concerned. Borderlands was somewhat of a proof of concept, if you will. A game with sarcastic, violent, and chaotic tone, and a gameplay loop featuring a loot system that scratched a very particular itch. In my opinion, Borderlands is an overlooked game. Why? Because you don't see it on many top 10 most influential games of all time lists, and I think it deserves to be there. It is in fact the grandfather of the looter shooter. Borderlands 1 didn't know what it wanted to be just yet, but it had just enough of the right ideas to plant the seed. The real magic, that was still one game away. This is where everything clicked. Borderlands 2 took the rough ideas from the first game, loot, co-op, weird humor, and sharpened them into something unforgettable. Gearbox didn't just iterate on the first game. They refined almost everything that felt half-baked the first time round. They found the voice, the tone, and the attitude that was Borderlands. It's regarded as one of the best looter shooters ever made, and to put things into perspective, Borderlands 2 sold around 30 million copies. The game was a wild commercial and critical success. This time the humor clicked. It was still over the top and ridiculous, but now it had timing, delivery, and actual punchlines. The game felt confident in its own weirdness, and that self-awareness became a core part of Borderlands' identity. The world of Pandora finally felt alive, not just as a backdrop for looting and shooting, but as a place with history, personality, and characters you actually cared about. And just like Star Wars has Darth Vader, Borderlands has Handsome Jack. One of the most iconic villains in all of video games, he was charismatic, unhinged, cruel, and whenever he popped into the corner of your screen, you knew you were in for something good. His constant presence, mocking you, taunting you, justifying himself, gave the entire game a narrative backbone that Borderlands 1 never had. And as a side note, I'm almost baffled at how the voice actor for Handsome Jack, Damon Clark, didn't explode after this role. How come he's not on the Troy Baker, Nolan North, and Ben Starr level? First I was thinking maybe he chose not to voice other video game characters, but I looked him up on IMDb and Days Gone additional voices? Come on man, really? Anyway, in terms of gameplay, Borderlands 2 hit a sweet spot that very few games in the genre have managed to replicate. Every enemy drop and loot chest felt like a free-to-play slot machine with no downsides that each time rewards you with something different. The gunplay still feels immaculate to this day. Also, the playable characters are way cooler than in the first game, with each class truly feeling different. Borderlands 2 also knew how to pace itself. There was a constant sense of momentum. Jokes, loot, combat, cutscene, repeat. What also helped immensely with the variety in Borderlands 2? Well, one of the best assembly of DLCs ever in a video game. You have a pirate-themed adventure in Captain Scarlet and her pirate's booty, Sir Hammerlock's big game hunt, Mr. Torgue's campaign of carnage, Tiny Tina's Assault on Dragon Keep, a fan favorite, and way later a DLC to bridge the gap between Borderlands 2 and 3, Commander Lilith, and the fight for Sanctuary. So what made Borderlands 2 the best in the series? Well, it wasn't just the loot or the gunplay. It was the world too, the personality, the variety, all into one. And that's why, for a lot of people, myself included, Borderlands 2 isn't just a great Borderlands game. It's the one everything else is measured against. Okay, look, I know this one gets dunked on a lot, but the pre-sequel isn't such a bad game. In fact, I had quite a lot of fun playing it. In terms of storytelling, it gave us something we hadn't seen before, a closer look at the origin of Handsome Jack, how he went from ambitious tech guy to full-blown space tyrant. And for fans who wanted more lore and character-driven storytelling, the pre-sequel actually delivered. But the biggest problem with this one, I get it. Timing and expectations. When you come out after Borderlands 2, having big shoes to fill is a complete understatement. All they had to do is more of the same. But considering the pre-sequel was not made by Gearbox proper, but rather 2K Australia, I get why they wanted to change more things. Unfortunately, they focused on changing some things that actually made Borderlands 2 great. The fact that Gearbox didn't make this game gets obvious pretty fast. The level design feels flat and the writing is a bit more hit or miss. The biggest and most important change of the pre-sequel was the setting, namely the moon. And you might be aware that on the moon there is very low gravity. It might sound fun at first, but after 5 minutes you realize that jumping around in low gravity makes combat less tight, more disorienting, and it made movement feel overall floaty and awkward. And when you compare that to the tight pacing of Borderlands 2, you get why the pre-sequel is the black sheep of the family. When tight, fluid combat is the main pillar of Borderlands, changing that might not be the brightest idea. Oh, did I mention this game takes place on the moon? Well, you might be aware that on the moon there's also no oxygen, so having to constantly manage your depleting reserves added another chore on your list. Guys, I'm here for Borderlands, I just wanna shoot shit and have fun. But here's the thing, the pre-sequel had guts. It just tried to shake things up. Low gravity, cryo weapons, oxygen management, laser guns. At least they tried to be different and not copy-paste its predecessor, and I commend that. The problem is, Borderlands isn't the franchise where people wanted experiments, especially not right after Gearbox figured exactly the perfect formula. People wanted more Borderlands 2, not a side story with moon physics and a morally grey Handsome Jack origin story. And that disconnect meant the pre-sequel never really had a shot at success. So yeah, it's not as iconic as 2, it's not as clean as 1, but it's also not the disaster some people make it out to be. It's a little weird offshoot that took some risks, and even if it didn't stick the landing, I kind of respect it for trying. If we're just talking shooting mechanics, Borderlands 3 is arguably the best game in the series. The gunplay feels better than ever, the movement is snappy, responsive, and finally modernized. The playable characters were cool, widely creative, and with more options than ever before. So why doesn't it feel magical? Well, because everything around the gameplay just drags it down. Let's start with the story, or whatever tangled mess of pacing and tone this thing was. The plot was so convoluted, annoying at best, and so full of filler that a huge chunk of players just started skipping cutscenes entirely. That's never a good sign, regardless of which kind of game you're playing. And the villains may be the most annoying in recent gaming memory. Easily the worst in the franchise. The Calypso twins were this desperate attempt to satirize influencer culture. What if streamers, but evil? And it just didn't land. They weren't threatening, they weren't funny, they were just loud and annoying. They felt more like forced commentary rather than actual characters, and every time they were on the screen it felt like the game was trying too hard to say something clever. Then there's the humor. Gearbox took what worked in Borderlands 2, and instead of giving us more of the same, they just gave us more. And more. And more. I mean, I like French fries, but if you force feed me 100 pounds of French fries, I'll definitely throw up. And even the returning characters suffered. Lilith felt like a hollow version of herself, Vaughn's energy was so exaggerated it became unbearable, and Maya's arc was rushed and wasted. The emotional beats were there on paper, but the game didn't earn them. It just expected you to care without doing the work. Everything in the gameplay department though worked, and it worked wonders. It's funny, I hear some people on the internet saying things like, Borderlands 3 sucked, people don't care about Borderlands anymore, the series was good only with the second one. Sure. But regardless of the commercial success, the magic just wasn't there. None of it stuck the way Borderlands 2 did, because the emotional core, the story, the characters, the tone, just wasn't there. Borderlands 3 was loud when it needed to be smart. So after Borderlands 2, the series had hit this weird point where the gameplay kept evolving, but everything else felt like it was spiraling. Louder, messier, more desperate to recapture something it had clearly lost. But from everything we've seen, and all the preview coverage that's out now, Borderlands 4 feels like a reset. Not a reboot, but a refocus. It's clear Gearbox heard the complaints and they toned down the cringy humor. Now, what I fear is that they didn't over-course correct. What I mean by that is, I didn't see that much humor or personality in the preview coverage almost at all, but my gut feeling says they'll nail it. In terms of gameplay, I don't think that there's anyone who still doubts Gearbox has the looter-shooter chops. You know the gunplay will feel spectacular in Borderlands 4. No doubt. What we've heard about this game is that those legendary drops won't be as easy to get as in previous titles. And I think that's good. You need a legendary drop to feel, well, legendary. So rarer, more meaningful drops is exactly the thoughtful evolution the core loop needed. But the main question of this video is, can Borderlands 4 recapture the magic? Well, the tone, and only the tone, will dictate the answer to that question. Or rather, time will tell. That's an unsuccessful pun from my part, as the villain of this game is the Timekeeper. No more screaming over live streams, no more YouTube jokes or begging for followers. The villain of Borderlands 4 seems to be cold, calculated, and methodical. I think it could actually work wonders when contrasted to the wackiness of Borderlands. In terms of setting, we're not on Pandora anymore. Kairos, a new planet with its own rules, lore, and history, seem to be the perfect refresh the series needed. Thank God it's not low gravity. But honestly, I feel optimistic about Borderlands 4. If everything we've seen so far is any indication, I think we might be on track for the series' best entry yet. Can it recapture the magic? I think it might actually can. Fingers crossed.